Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Amma ba'd. Habati fil assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We ask that Allah Azza wa Jal, the Almighty, accepts our good and forgives our evil, protects us from kulli su wa makruh. Habati fillah, it's very important for us to know our religion. And so I've started this course, and bi'idhnillah ta'ala, we are going to go through the chapter of tahara, of purification, for the new Muslim. And we're going to use one of the beginner texts in the Hanbali fiqh, the Hanbali madhab, which is called Umdat al-Ahkam, or Umdat al-Fiqh. And in this section of the treatise, which is an introduction for us to the issues of purification, how do we wash ourselves for prayers, an introduction to women's issues, and so forth, I encourage you to follow along and try to gain benefit in order to practice your religion and come closer to Allah. And we ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us success and tawfiq. So in beginning this series, we're going to jump right in. We're not going to give a lot of details. We want to enable you so that way you can pray properly, so you know and are fairly grounded with the issue of purification. So we're going to jump right in. And the first chapter that Imam Maqdisi, rahmatullahi alayhi, Ibn Qudama, that he mentioned was called the chapter of the rulings of water, Bab Ahkam al-Miyah, the chapter of the rulings of the various types of water. Now, one of the reasons we find in fiqh books the issue, talking about purification, because purification is a shart, it's a condition for prayer. If you want to pray in Islam, you need to have wudu. You need to have yourself washed and prepared for prayer. And in light of this, the Quran and the Sunnah both illustrate this for us. From the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "La yaqbal Allahu salata ahadakum idha ahdatha hatta yatawaddau." Allah does not accept the prayer of any one of you if he passes gas, basically, or uses the bathroom, or has hadith, what is referred to as hadith, until he makes wudu. So that means we cannot pray without wudu. And that is the origin of this issue, is that a Muslim has to wash himself or herself for prayer. So we need to know about water then. If this is a condition for prayer, we need to know about water and its various types. So water, in general, water was created pure and it purifies, meaning water was created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and it purifies. So rainwater and all kind of natural forms of water, and really all types of water, it purifies. It will clean you. Now we're going to get into the details. So it purifies from the ritual impurities of hadith, as we mentioned. So that means if you pass gas, you need water to purify yourself for prayer. If you urinate or defecate, akramakum Allah, you need to use water in order to purify yourself for prayer. And likewise, the woman who has menstrual bleeding, or she has postpartum bleeding, which is the bleeding from after having a child, she also has to prepare herself for prayer once she has finished her period, and that is through water. That can only be achieved, in general, we're going to get to details, through water. So the asl is we go to water. So water, it removes the physical impurities from things like najasat, what we call filth. And purity cannot be attained from any liquid other than that. So this means basically that water, if it is mixed with another pure substance, for example, and it's changed its substance. So for example, we use water and tea, for example. Now that substance is actually changed, even though the origin was water, and it's still pure, but it doesn't purify. Meaning, if you put tea bags in a container full of water, and you then want to make wudu with it, you want to use it to prepare yourself for prayer. If those tea bags have changed that water, which usually tea bags will, especially depending on the amount of water and the amount of tea bags, that if it has changed that substance, that it is no longer defined as water, or it's changed the color or the taste, then it is no longer water which you can use for wudu, for tahara. But rather, it's still a pure substance. You can drink it, of course, but it does not purify you. If you have and that's because it's changed the substance. It's changed in its name. The substance itself is changed. Likewise, if it is, you have water, and someone's, akramakum, they urinated near it, and then some of that pee, that urine, got in the water. If that water, that container of water, and the scholars differ on the amount and so forth. Some scholars say just because a little bit of that filth or najasa got in there, it's no longer pure. Another group of the scholars say as long as it doesn't change the awsaf or the characteristics of the water, meaning a little pee got in the water, and again, if it's a small amount, a small cup, you throw that away. You shouldn't use that. But if it is a larger, gallon or some big bucket or something, and a little bit of urine got in it, as long as it does not change the smell, the taste, or the color, then it is still can purify with that water. You can still make wudu with it. You may not want to because of, but say if you're in a situation and you don't have much water, and that's all you have for tahara, and you have a big, huge barrel of water, and some najasa, something filthy got in there that didn't change it. It didn't change it though. But you saw an animal, and it's an animal you can't eat, and it urinated or whatever, and it got in there. Something got in there, some poop, some urine, and it did not change it. It didn't really affect that substance. Technically, you can use that for wudu. You can use that for your purification, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. The next issue that Ibn Qudamah, he mentioned the issue with flowing and stagnant water, large and small. So he says, when the water reaches kullatain, so in the past they had certain measurements, and this is a measurement in the past in parts of the Arab world, especially in Syria and stuff, what was called kullatain. These are two large containers. Or it is flowing water. When it's flowing water, like in a river, then nothing can render it impure. So the scholars in the past, they used a certain amount of what two large containers, and I'm not sure, we'd have to look at the measurement of those containers, whether that's a couple of gallons or something, but it's a large amount of container, meaning that some najasa, if something falls in it that's filthy, it's not going to alter that water. And that's really the main point with regards to using water for purification. Or if it's flowing, for example, you want to make wudu in a river, you're out hiking, whatever the case may be, that water is flowing. So even if someone or several people urinated upstream, that is not going to affect the water. And we know this from a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he mentioned about not urinating, that it's forbidden for us to urinate, especially in stagnant water. And it's not beneficial to do that even in flowing water, because it can harm, it's harmful. People drink the water or what have you and use that water. But anyway, especially it's forbidden, according to the Prophet ﷺ, in water which is stagnant water. So the Shaykh, he says, when the water reaches kullatain, these two large containers, or it is flowing, then nothing can render it impure, except when, and here's the exception, except what changes its color, its taste, or its odor. So that means if the smell of the water changes from najasa, from filth, or the taste, you can actually kind of taste that it's changed, or its color, the water's now brown, it's now yellowish, then that you cannot use for tahara. Other than that, would be rendered pure by any mixing with impurities. So that means, because that's generally those are larger bodies of water, and a large amount of water and the flowing water, then that will not be harmed by impurities. And the amount of the qullatain in contemporary measurements would be approximately 190 liters, and I'm not sure how much that is in gallons. So the next issue he brings is mixing with pure substances and used water. He said, and if something that is pure but not purifying was cooked within the water, or it was mixed with the water, and it prevailed upon its name, okay, we'll explain all of this, or if it was used in removing a ritual impurity, then it will be stripped of its attribute of being a purifier. Meaning, if you have water, and you've now mixed it with something which is also a pure substance, but it's changing it from water. And that we mentioned the example of tea, for example, tea or coffee, or some sort of other substance that's a pure substance, that it's no longer considered water. When we mix water and coffee, dried coffee beans, we don't call that water anymore. We call it coffee. It's changed its name. And that's what he's talking about. It's now changed its substance. We don't call that, oh, that's brown water with a coffee taste and smell. No, we refer to it as coffee, even though it has a large amount, majority of it is made out of water, but it's changed its characteristic. So we say that coffee is pure, but it does not purify. So it's clean, it's halal, you can drink it, but it does not purify you. It doesn't prepare you for prayer. If you are hiking and all you have is coffee, you do not use the coffee for wudu. You would use the other forms of tahara that Allah has legislated, like tayammum, and we'll talk about that when we get to that section. So he says, the next issue he brings up, he talks about when there is doubt, when there's doubt regarding purification. So he says, and if a person has doubts regarding the purity of water or something else, or its impurity, he should base his actions on certainty. And this comes to a certain principle in the Sharia, which is al-yaqeen la yuzulu bi-shak, that something which is you're certain of, it's not removed by doubt. Something that you're certain of is not removed by doubt. And in this situation, also related to this principle, is that something that in its origin is pure, it doesn't change with doubtfulness. So, for example, if I have a drinking bottle of water that I've poured, and I've got it from the river, I got it from the rain, I got it from my sink, whatever the case may be, the asl of that, the origin of that water, is that it's pure. If I begin to speculate now, oh man, we had the kids over and the friends came over and the lid was off, there's a chance, one of the little kids could have urinated in it. Something could have got in there. Somebody had a dog nearby and the dog could have urinated it. So we don't speculate, because we are certain that that water that entered that container is pure. That purity cannot be removed by doubtfulness. And the doubtfulness would be speculation. Oh, maybe a bird that we can't eat, a hawk or something, it came and it pooped in it. Oh, just maybe a dog, he urinated over there and it happened to splash off the table and then fall. No, we can't speculate. So hopefully you understand that. It's a very important thing, and it will help you with a lot of things in your religion to know that something that it's in its origin is pure. It is not removed by doubtfulness. And that comes with a lot of issues in your deen. The next point he mentions, he says, if the filthy spot on a person's garment or otherwise was, you're not sure of whether it's, there's a filthy spot on your garment, he should wash off his garment with that which would be sufficient to make him certain he washed off the impurity. Means that you don't have to put your whole thing in the laundry. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you had a little spot of, for example, there was some urine, a child it splashed on you, whatever the case may be. You were walking in your garment somehow, it rubbed up against something najis, dog poop, anything, akramakum Allah. That now what you would be required of you is that you would wash the spot where the najasa touched, if you know where that is. If you know it got on your pant leg and you can kind of see the spot or the area, you can wash that whole area and make sure you remove the impurity. The point is to remove the impurity, because in Islam we don't want to pray in clothing that has what is called najasa. We don't want to have urine, defecation, blood. Those are some of the main impurities that also, even akramakum Allah, from semen, from sperm or something like this, or a wet dream, that those things you also have to wash. But they are also, the scholars differ on whether that's considered impure or not, meaning semen, because the scholars who say no, it's not impure, they say that it is a semen, it's from people, and people are created from that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes us created from that, from semen, the mixing of semen. And this does, people are not created from najasa. So that is their argument. They say people are not created from filth. So that's why semen is not filthy, even though you should try to remove it as much as possible. If you find it's on your garment for whatever reason, akramakum Allah, clean it. Try to wash it with water, and to remove the filth. And if something tiny is left on there, it doesn't harm your prayer. Like a tiny, tiny bit, a little light stain for some reason didn't come out or something, because it's aslan, it's not considered filth, although they classify it, some of the scholars say it's mustakhbath. It's kind of, as a cultural thing, we don't usually accept akramakum Allah, sperm or something on our clothing. We don't consider that a person having clean clothing. So you should remove it for that reason. And that's washing those impurity. He also mentioned, he says, if pure water was confused with impure water. So he's bringing a lot of different issues. So for example, you have two containers, and you had, for whatever, you're in the hospital, you had to urinate in one, and another one had water in it. And your urine happened to be clear, akramakum Allah. And you don't know which one is the najasa, the urine, and you don't know which one is the water. And you didn't find any other water, so you're out of water. All you have is that little bit of water. You should dump that water out, and then you make tayammum. So under those circumstances, it will be legislated for you to make tayammum, and that means using clean earth, or it could be dust on the walls, dust on the table, wherever you can find, and we'll talk about it more in detail, but you slap your hand on it, and you wipe your hands and rub your face, and that is considered your purification, your tahara. That suffices you. You don't have to wash the rest of your body with the clean dust and the earth. And the next issue, he says, and if purifying water was confused with pure water, that is not purifying, then he should make wudu out of each one. So according to the madhab of Imam Ahmed, this means that, for example, if you had water in one container and you had water that was mixed with rose water or something else in another container, both of them are pure substances. So he's saying that you can make wudu with both. You make wudu twice. You use the good water and use the other water, because you don't know which one is which, maybe. And under those circumstances, that would suffice you for making wudu, because both substances were pure, but they were both not under the classification of purifying. For example, it could be something else which could be even more confusing. Maybe it's something, it doesn't have a smell or nothing to indicate that it's water, that it has some other substance. Maybe it is the tea or something, and you maybe for some reason you can't really smell it. It's a special kind of tea and it comes out clear, okay, for example. And you have both those containers. You could make wudu with both, and that would suffice you, because that means one of those containers purified you, and the other one did not make you dirty. The next issue Imam Ahmed, or according to the madhab of Imam Ahmed that Imam Ibn Qudama mentions, he says, and if there are both clean and unclean garments, then you should pray a certain number of times equal to the number of unclean garments plus one. You should make each prayer in a different garment. Let's make that clear. So he's mentioning here that if you have a garment which is, you have two thobes, okay? Maybe you only have two garments. You only own two pairs of pants or something like this. And one is clean and the other one has filth on it. And you're unable, maybe the time is you don't have a lot of time to pray. He's saying you should pray a certain number of times equal to the number of unclean garments plus one. He's saying that you pray 3 times. So this is not necessarily the correct view, but you should make each prayer in a different garment. So basically, you should pray in one pair of pants, and then which is one pair, and then pray again in the other pair, because you don't know which garment is pure, meaning because you can't pray if it's a filthy garment, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. The next issue that he brings up, which is very important for us, has to do with removing impurities. How do we remove filth from our garments and from things? So he says the impurity of the dog and the pig should be washed 7 times, including one with soil. So here he mentions the khanzir. He mentions pig. So because the Prophet ﷺ said, إِذَا وَلَغَ الْكَلْبُ فِي إِنَاءِ أَحَدِكُمْ فَيَغْسِلُ سَبْعًا وَفْرَهُ ثَمَانَةَ بِالتُّرَابِ. The Prophet ﷺ said, if a dog licks in your water utensil, that you should wash it 7 times, and the first time is with dirt. So that means you have your container that you were going to use, and a dog licked your container. It lapped water out of your container. Then you pour that water out, and you wash it 1 time with dirt and 7 times with water afterwards. And that will make it legislatively pure to use. They use something which is called qiyas, and the scholars differ about this, for example, a pig. Okay, most likely we're going to rarely encounter something like this, but if a pig does, some of the scholars, they mention this also applies to the pig because he also has a filthy type of, he's also severely filthy in that sense, and even more so than the dog. Another group of the scholars say, no, it doesn't apply to the pig because this hadith that I just mentioned, the narrations that we mentioned, they mention only a dog. So some they use what's called analogy or qiyas on that, and Allah knows best. The next issue, he says, it shall be sufficient for the rest of the impurities to wash them 3 times until purified. And basically, this means really that when you have impurities that you need to remove, you should wash it. He mentions 3 times. And I believe this is from a type of qiyas as well, a type of analogy. But in general, you should wash it until it removes the najasa. So, for example, if it somehow, we mentioned a child that urinates on your garment, or you fell in akramakum Allah, dog defecate in poo-poo, okay? And it gets on your it's all mashed on your knee. You need to wash that knee very well and make sure you remove all of the najasa. Now, that's another issue because since it's a dog, some of the scholars are going to make the analogy and say you should wash it 7 times. The first time is with dirt, removing all the major parts, and then washing it with dirt or sand, and then water. Another group will say, no, you just have to remove that najasa because the hadith mention if a kelb or a dog licks your utensil, he laps in your utensil. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, but however, you'd want to remove all the najasa. So say, for example, it's something else that's najis. You fell and it was human, akramakum Allah, human defecation or something. It got on your garment. You don't have to wash it 3, 5, 7 times. No, instead, for those garments and removing the impurities, you just have to make sure you remove the impurity. And one of the evidences for this is the Prophet ﷺ was in his masjid, and a man, a Bedouin Arab, he came into the masjid. قام أعرابي فبال في المسجد فزجره الناس. So a man, he came into he was a Bedouin Arab, and he came, meaning so he didn't have a lot of knowledge. He came out of the desert. He was a tribal man. He came out, and he came in the Prophet ﷺ's masjid, and he just began peeing in the Prophet ﷺ's masjid. This is during Hadith of Rasulullah ﷺ. The Prophet, فَزَجْرُهُ النَّاسِ. So the people became very upset. They wanted to beat him, those Sahaba, radiallahu ta'ala anhum ajma'in. And you can imagine if someone just walked in the masjid, pulled their pants down, akramakum Allah, started peeing in the front row or anywhere in the masjid. People would be very upset. They would probably try to hurt him or at least remove him and stop him. فَزَجْرُهُ النَّاسِ فَقَالَ لَهُمْ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمْ دَعْهُ. The Prophet ﷺ ordered them to stop. Leave him alone. Basically, let him finish. And so that when the man finished urinating in the masjid, the Prophet did not want him to be interrupted. Akramakum Allah. And this shows his gentleness. And this shows his wisdom. Because the scholars mention that if the Prophet ﷺ had allowed the people, for one, okay, they would have harmed him. Number two, if they had interrupted him and made him stop. For one, him trying to hold his urine would harm him. And secondly, it's almost impossible. It would have went everywhere, akramakum Allah. If you try to hold your urine, if you know, akramakum Allah, for those who, all of us have experienced that, and it will go everywhere. It would get all over his garment. It would have spread even more. But instead, he urinated in a specific spot. The Prophet ﷺ allowed him to finish. And then he said, Subbu ala bol al-Arabi dhunuban min ma. And in one narration, the Prophet ﷺ said, throw water from a container on the urine of that person. He didn't say, use any other things, any other items. So from this, we know, of course, water, that it purifies, and that you can use water to purify the najasa on the ground or on your clothing. You don't have to do it many times or something. He said, Subba alayhi ma. Just wash it with water. And so this lets us know that we can use water, that water removes impurities. That's the asl. So if it was blood, if it was anything else, it doesn't mean you can't use other things because you really want to, clean that up. But we're talking about making it Sharia stamped, where that you can pray there and so forth, or pray in those garments. So you need to, the asl is we use water. So we use water until that stuff comes out, until the najasa. So in the case of the Bedouin Arab, he urinated, so they, were ordered to throw a whole, whatever of water to remove the urine, to get that urine, to make sure it washed away. Likewise, if it was on the carpet, likewise, if it was on your garment, you want to use enough water to remove the impurities. And if the impurities on the ground, then pouring water over it will remove its harm, because of the saying of the Prophet ﷺ, so pour on the urine of the Bedouin 1 bucketful of water. The next issue they mention, it's sufficient to remove the impurity of a male infant's urine that hasn't started eating regular food, to sprinkle the area with water so it's wet but not soaked. So here's the issue here, is because there's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ when he was talking about the bowl of ghulam, meaning the urine of an infant that is, and again, this is the infant, it's not a toddler or the other stages, but it's an infant that is still, a child that is still drinking his mother's milk. As long as he has not tasted food, he has not chewed on food, he's not changed his diet, and he's only living off milk, then in order to remove his urine, you can just sprinkle water. If it's a girl, the situation is different. The scholars mention some of the reasons behind this. That's really outside of our scope. We're trying to get through this material just so you know the Islamic ruling so you can practice your deen. So you can do that. You can sprinkle the water, to kind of remove it. Okay. And there's no harm if you want to, to make sure and just get rid of it. But that's the hukum. That's the difference. If it is an infant boy that has never eaten food, that they only live off their mother's milk. Now, the next issue, he says, likewise, prostatic secretions al-medi takes the same ruling as a male infant's urine. A trivial amount of it will be excused. So again, using, as we said, semen, because semen is not considered najasa, especially under and that we told you some of the reasons, and according to the madhab of Imam Ahmed, there are other madhabs who view it as najasa. Regardless, no one is saying walk around with that on your garment, clean it, use water and clean it. But if it's a little bit, just a little bit, it's something very yasir, that's not going to hurt you. Meaning you tried to clean it and a little bit was left, or you didn't notice it on your garment and you prayed. And then you find, oh, there was a little bit here on my garment or my sweater or whatever. Then this will not harm you, the trivial amount. Likewise, the trivial amount of blood. We also have dalil for that. We're not going to get into all the evidences, but there is a hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in which one of the mothers of the believers, I believe is Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, and she mentioned that during the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we used to, even if there was something yasir, if there was something very, very light left on the garment, the women tried to clean her garment, but a little bit of blood, it just kind of stained. It wasn't anything, and it just couldn't really be removed very easily with water and that, washing it like that it would take maybe more other times, then this does not harm. If it's something very, very yasir, like very, very little in which you don't even really notice it. He also mentions, and its byproducts of pus, purulent matter, and similar things are all exempt. He's also saying if there are other things like pus, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, that these things don't affect. If there's something a little bit, of course, anything that is impure, we must remove it. If something is what is considered mustakhbith, these things are mustakhbith, meaning that we consider them as a custom. People consider pus, they consider these things kind of nasty. You wouldn't go to your job interview with that. So you should try to wash those things. But if something a little bit is on there when you pray, it's not harming you. It's not harming your prayer. The trivial amount is that which is not repugnant. Then he mentions the next thing, semen and urine of livestock. So he mentions the semen of a human and the urine of animals whose flesh can be eaten are all pure. So that means any animal that's halal for us, their urine and so forth, it's considered pure. So that means if you're hiking and or you're walking in a bird that is a bird that we can eat. So a hawk and eagles, because they're birds of prey, we can't eat those. But if it's a bird that doesn't have those claws and so forth, and they're not a predator, bird of prey, a pigeon, for example, and a little bit of some poop got on you, you should try to wash that because it's mustakhbith. You wouldn't want to come into the masjid and you've got a big old thing of pigeon stuff on you, but rather you try to wash it. If something a little bit is there, it's not going to harm you because the roth or the urine and the poop of those animals is considered pure. It's considered pure, not purifying. It doesn't purify you, but it's pure, meaning it doesn't harm your tahara. But of course, customarily, we would not pray like that. You would want to wash it from your garment. But this is what's important here is you want to know these rulings for practicing your Islam and knowing and having a better understanding if a situation arises. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Almighty, to accept our good and forgive our evil. Until our next lesson, in which we'll talk about utensils and lavatory, we'll try to be as brief as possible. Again, we're not using a lot of evidence. We're just sticking with the text and just trying to make it understandable and digestible for us all. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad.